My knuckles hit the plating on his jaw, and the whole training hall went silent. Not a gasp, not a cheer, just silence, the kind that presses on your ears. My hand was already swelling. 300 cadets stared at me like I had broken a law of physics. In a way, I had. Nobody expected the human to be the one still standing. My name is Daniel Okoro. I am from Earth. And until that afternoon, nobody at the Varinthi Combat Academy had ever taken me seriously. I had been at the academy for 4 months. Humanity had only joined the wider alliance of worlds 8 years earlier, and we were still treated like the new arrivals nobody quite trusted. Our homeworld carried an official label in every alliance record: Deathworld. That word sat somewhere between hazardous and unfortunate. Our gravity was too strong for most visiting species, our weather too extreme, our old history too full of conflict, and our wildlife too eager to test us at every turn. Other species found this funny. Not cruel exactly, just amused, the way someone smiles at a small animal that has learned a clever trick. Surprising, maybe, never something to fear. The best student in my class was a cadet named Threll. He was built like a solid wall with legs, covered in dense natural plating, and his family had produced military officers for 9 generations. He was fast, disciplined, and completely convinced that humans were only at the academy to fill a quota. He never said this with any meanness. That was the strange part. He said it kindly, the way you might comfort a child who insisted they could carry something far too heavy for them. "You are trying so hard, Okoro," he told me once, resting one heavy limb on my shoulder. "It is admirable. Your kind makes up for what your bodies lack with effort alone." I smiled and thanked him, because 4 months of being underestimated teaches you exactly how to respond. You smile, you nod, then you keep training long before sunrise, when the gravity chambers are empty and nobody is watching you struggle. Nobody was watching either when I slowly stopped struggling. The turning point came during an open sparring exhibition. Instructor Vashka ran this every term. 2 cadets would step into the ring with no weapons and no complicated rules. Only the first person to submit or fall would lose. Most of the time it was pure showmanship, a chance for top students to impress an audience of younger cadets and visiting officials. Threll chose me. Of course he did. I believe he truly thought he was doing me a favor, letting the human test himself against real skill without being embarrassed by someone stronger. "Try to make this interesting, Okoro," he said loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. Laughter rolled through the seats. Not hateful laughter, just the kind that stings anyway. I said nothing. Words never worked on someone like Threll. Only results mattered to him. The match began exactly the way everyone expected. Threll moved first, incredibly fast, testing me with a strike I barely blocked in time. The force of it rattled through my arm and into my teeth. The crowd made a sound of approval, already certain how this would end. What none of them understood about humans, what almost nobody in the Alliance understood, is that we do not fight like sprinters. We fight like something built for distance, wearing the mask of a sprinter. Long ago, our ancestors chased prey for hours across open land, until the animal simply gave out from exhaustion. That history shaped something deep in us that no amount of natural armor ever had to develop. We did not need to be faster. We only needed to still be standing when everyone else grew tired. Threll landed several more solid strikes in the opening minute. Each one hurt more than the last. Each one also cost him slightly more energy, while his impressive plating, heavy and strong as it was, began to work against him in a match that was stretching far longer than the short, decisive bouts his body was built for. By the second minute, his breathing had changed. It was subtle, something only someone who had spent months studying their own exhaustion in a gravity chamber would notice. I recognized it because I had spent countless early mornings learning exactly how my own body sounded right before it hit its limit, so I would know the moment an opponent reached his. His next strike came a fraction of a second later than the ones before it. Fatigue does that. It strips away polish and leaves only the plain mechanics underneath. and plane mechanics can be read like an open book. I did not step away from it. I stepped into it, letting it graze my shoulder instead of my face, and I put every ounce of strength my body carried, strength shaped by a world that had tested it since birth, into a single strike, aimed at the narrow gap where his jaw plating met his neck guard. That was the sound the whole room heard. A dull, heavy thud. Threll did not fall gracefully. He went down like a structure losing its balance, one knee first, then the rest of him following in a slow, uneven collapse. The hall stayed completely silent for 3 long seconds before Instructor Vashka called the match. I stood over him, my hand throbbing, my chest rising and falling hard, thinking only one thought. That is one. Threll was not seriously hurt. His plating had done its job, mostly. His pride took far longer to recover than his jaw did. But the story of that match did not stay inside the training hall. Cadets talk constantly, and instructors talk even more. Within a week, half the academy had heard some exaggerated version where I had defeated the top cadet with a single blow, close enough to the truth that I stopped bothering to correct anyone. What changed was not that everyone suddenly respected humans. Old assumptions rarely disappear because of one moment. What changed is that people began asking questions instead of repeating old answers. Instructor Vashka pulled records on human biology that had been sitting untouched in the Academy archive since our species joined the wider alliance. Nobody had studied them closely before, because why would anyone bother studying the so-called fragile species in depth? She found details that made her rebuild an entire section of the training program. Our pain tolerance sat far above the average recorded for most alliance species. Our sustained physical output during long, difficult activity placed conditioned humans in a category almost nobody else could match. Our nervous system responded to stress and exertion in a way the Alliance medical texts had once labeled unusual, without ever asking why it happened. Deathworld was never meant as a title of pity. It was a title earned by survivors. We simply happened to be the only thinking species who had survived a world that difficult. The training program changed within a month. Endurance testing became part of every combat class. Gravity conditioning, once optional, became required for every cadet. How long a fighter could sustain effort was finally treated as something that mattered instead of something ignored. Cadets from many different worlds began showing up to the early morning gravity sessions I had once trained in, completely alone. Threll became one of them, arriving the very first week after his jaw had healed, saying nothing about our match, simply running the same difficult drills at the same early hour with the same quiet focus I remembered from before. We never became close friends exactly, but somewhere near the 6th month, he stopped calling me admirable and started calling me by my proper rank instead. That change meant more than it sounds like. Coming from someone like Threll, that shift was close to an apology. I still think about that match sometimes, the way you think about the single moment that quietly divides your life into before and after. Not because I became some famous name across the academy halls. I did not. I graduated somewhere in the middle of my class, unremarkable in most ways that show up on paper. But I managed to change one small assumption inside one institution, and assumptions tend to fall like dominoes once the first one shifts. The instructors began teaching human biology properly, without shortcuts or old guesses. The next group of human cadets arrived, already treated with a measure of respect instead of quiet dismissal. And somewhere in the academy records now, filed right next to the report describing what happened to Threll during that exhibition match, there is a short note recommending a full review of how Deathworld species are classified across the entire alliance. They still use that word for us officially. Deathworld. Hazardous. They just choose to say it a little more carefully now. Sometimes late at night, I still remember standing in that gravity chamber before sunrise, alone, sweat soaking through my uniform, pushing through another set long after my legs begged me to stop. I remember wondering if any of it would ever matter, if anyone would ever notice the difference between trying hard and actually improving. I did not train that morning, or any morning before it, because I expected a crowd to someday watch me win. I trained because quitting felt worse than exhaustion ever could. That is the part nobody tells you about proving people wrong. It rarely happens in the moment everyone remembers. It happens quietly, for months, in an empty room where nobody claps and nobody records the outcome. The single strike that changed the academy took less than a second. The years of mornings that made that strike possible took far longer, and no one saw a single one of them until it suddenly mattered. Threll and I still cross paths sometimes, now serving in different divisions across the Alliance. We nod, we exchange a few words, nothing dramatic. But every time I see him, I remember that he was the first person at that academy to genuinely underestimate me, and, without meaning to, the first person to give me the exact reason I needed to prove that assumption completely wrong. Earth is still called a death world. Our species is still viewed as unusual by most of the Alliance. But somewhere in that vast collection of worlds and species, there is now a training academy that no longer assumes strength, only comes wrapped in thick plating or impressive speed. Sometimes it comes from a world that never once made survival easy, producing people who learned, quietly and without complaint, exactly how to endure. And sometimes, all it takes to change an entire institution is a single, well-placed strike, thrown by someone everyone had already decided to underestimate.